computing as opposed to quantum communication is a big threat to communications as well, because if you or I may communicate through, say, public key encryption using very secure public key technology, where it would take you millions of years with a classic computer to crack that communication. But then with a quantum computer, that if you don't have a post-quantum cryptography algorithm which is resilient to quantum computing, even though the quantum computers don't exist yet, we know that it's moving forward, and in some time in the future we may have a quantum computer that could perform that attack. Someone could eavesdrop our secure communication, and then in 5 years' time, when the computers exist, they could attack that communication and decrypt it using quantum computers which don't exist today.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders in Tech podcast, where we're interviewing leaders in technology that are really making a difference with their teams they're leading. Today, we have with us Chris. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, David. I'm very pleased to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Chris, sometimes I try to avoid saying last names because I'm horrible pronunciating them. So I'll ask you 3 questions. What's your full name? Where do you live? And what do you do for a living, Chris?
Well, my name is Chris Murphy, a very Irish name, although I haven't managed to trace my Irish roots. I live in the city of Bath in the UK, a famous Roman and Georgian city, and I work in technology. I work for a company called Viavi Solutions, and we make communication testing equipment. It's a lot more than that, but that in a nutshell is what it does. And I work for the Viavi CTO. I represent him in the EMEA region.
This podcast is brought to you by ISU Corp. Are you having trouble with your software projects? Is there a project that's taking too long or a technology you can't handle? We can help. We are ISU Corp, experts in custom software since 2005. With almost 20 years of experience, we can solve any technical problem from new businesses to satellite software. We've done it all. Let us turn your ideas into reality. Learn more about how we can help by visiting us at www.isucorp.ca. Your solution starts here.
So you report to the CTO?
That's correct, yes.
For a specific region. So Let's go more into detail. What do you guys do for testing equipment?
Well, so there's a lot that goes into communications. We need people who can build the infrastructure that actually delivers the communication, but there's so much more to delivering those networks than just the infrastructure. We need to be able to make sure that the infrastructure that's built is able to operate effectively, and we can do that in the lab. Make sure that we're testing the equipment in many scenarios that they're going to encounter out in the field. As we deploy the networks, as we deploy the infrastructure, we need to be able to test it to make sure it's been installed correctly, is connected correctly, has the right parameters, is radiating if it's a wireless network in the right way to the right frequencies. And then once it's operational, then the operator needs to understand if the network is working well, if there are problems, if there's interference, poor coverage, or too much demand in certain areas, and whether they need to correct the operation of the network, change the parameters, or install new infrastructure.
So when you're saying communications, you're talking about wireless networks, right?
Yes. So wireless is a big part of what the company I work for does, but there's also wired connectivity as well. So the fiber networks which connect up the data centers, the businesses, the households, the wireless communication networks themselves. These are critical pieces. Undersea networks, these are critical pieces of the international infrastructure. So, fiber is becoming more and more important as time goes on.
Well, eventually people don't realize that, you turn on your phone and you have internet, and then you turn on your computer and everything works like magic, but there is a whole infrastructure behind that, right?
Absolutely. And COVID was a big impetus into the industry, because suddenly people had to be working remotely. There was a big investment to pick up the demand that was presented as a result of the pandemic and the need for people to work from home or wherever they were. So that was a quite a challenge for the industry.
I can imagine, Chris. And so your job, what does your day-to-day job looks like? If you bring your daughter or your son to work, what will they see?
Well, so in the CTO office, so we're working across different business units. So we've got a very diverse portfolio for the different types of challenges I was describing at the start. So we've got hundreds of products across those different business units and the different use cases that we're addressing. So what we're trying to do is to understand how is the technology changing? How is it going to change as we transition to 6G, for example, the transition to fiber connectivity, and what's the implications for our different products that we have? What are the new challenges they're going to have to face in the future, and how are we going to position ourselves to address those? So that's one part of the job. Another part of the job is to engage with the industry, because there's many industry bodies that are working on standardization or developing specifications for how interworking, how networks will interoperate, how different parts of the networks will interoperate. And we need to understand that. We need to influence that where it makes sense, so that we can test these networks and test the components as they're developed. So that's another part of what we do. Also engaging with the wider community to show that Viavi is a credible player, and we understand the technology, and we're a good business partner because we are thinking ahead. We're looking at the future, and we're trying to shape the future. We also work with academia and research institutions doing projects, collaborative projects, for example, funded by the European Commission, and also other agencies. So, for example, we've got a flagship test lab in Arizona, which is for testing Open RAN, open radio access networks, which is an interesting development that the US is investing in quite a lot at the moment.
So So tell me a bit more about that network. That sounds interesting, and I never heard it before.
So for many years, if you wanted to build a wireless, a cellular mobile network, then you would go to one of the vendors like the Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung, and they'd sell you a network. But there's been a push over recent years to break it down so you can buy different components from different suppliers and open up the network, and that means that it's easier to then adapt your network or switch suppliers, because it's not one big jump to a new supplier. You can do it in different parts of your network, but it also means that the networks become more flexible, more dynamic. So as you want to, for example, sometimes it makes sense to put certain network components closer to the edge because you want to have very low latency services. So if your networks are decoupled to the extent you can design the network in a flexible way, then you can put capability towards the edge where it makes sense because you want latency, or more towards the center where you don't need the latency. You can save costs, for example. So there's a lot of, if you look at how the networks are architected today compared to what they were like 20 years ago in 3G days, it's a very different world. It's fascinating how it's changed.
You know what I find interesting, Chris? I don't know if you've seen it before. I remember 3G days, and it was amazing. You could get emails, send emails. You could probably send pictures too. But now when I lose data, so when I lose signal, and it goes from 5G to 3G, I get nothing out of that cell phone. It's almost like the network is dead. Is it because they retired the 3G network and they just rely on the 5G, or what's going on there?
Well, so it probably depends on the situation. It's a specific situation, but as new technologies come out and people upgrade, so as you go from 3G to 4G and then 4G to 5G, the networks become more efficient. The way the spectrum, the RF spectrum is used is more efficient. You can get more data through. So it makes sense to upgrade people, but there's always devices which are still stuck on the old systems because they're not being upgraded. And these might be handsets, but they might also be infrastructure which is connected through cellular, but is part of a system, maybe a utility system. And so you can't really shut down those old technologies without considering those legacy customers, for want of a better word. But then sometimes you find your handset still supports 3G, and sometimes you get pushed onto 3G for various reasons. Maybe this capacity is challenged on the 5G network, and then you find you can support 3G, but there's no capacity there because people just aren't using it for commercial smartphones. So, you don't get the the experience you're used to with 5G, even though in the 3G days, when the whole network was 3G, you would get a good experience because pretty much the whole network was 3G, apart from the old 2G layer to provide the continuity for the older applications.
Understood. So yeah, it makes sense, right? So I guess they give priority to devices that are legacy, that are critical on the 3G network, as opposed to somebody that just lost 5G connectivity and wants to use the 3G network, right?
Yeah, and counterintuitively, I think we'll see 2G networks prevailing more for longer than 3G networks. Operators tend to turn off the 3G sooner than 2G because they have there are still lots of legacy devices on 2G, and they can't afford to cut them off. Well, often there are restrictions that mean they can't cut off the 2G network because of those legacy services.
There's still a 2G network out there?
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So I know that there was a paradigm shift between 4G and 5G. Do you know what was the big difference?
Well, there are many differences between 4G and 5G. So it's quite nuanced depending on how you look at it. So for example, the fundamental radio technology that's used for 5G is somewhat similar to that for 4G, but it was quite a difference between 3G and 4G in terms of how the actual the radio is modulated and how the transmissions work. There was a big push in 5G towards supporting a variety of services. So up until 4G, really the focus was on data and voice and messaging.
Right.
But then was recognition by the industry that if we could engineer our cellular communications to be able to support a diversity of services with different requirements. So some services require very low latency, some require high reliability, some require massive connectivity to Internet of Things, some just require good old fashioned throughput and mobile broadband. And any service you and I can think of will have its certain characteristics it needs to meet and to give a good service. So the focus was on designing a system that was flexible, that could have some portion of the resources reserved for a particular service with certain characteristics and another portion for other characteristics, and then it gave the operators flexibility, and that was the big push, and there was some success in delivering that. I'd say we haven't seen the massive explosion in differentiated services that we might have done, but it has delivered some very interesting technological innovations and advances, and continues to develop.
Well, I remember that the big push was because of the Internet of Things, right? IoT, because now even your fridge wants to connect to the internet, right?
Yes, although your fridge might well connect through your Wi-Fi network. So
Wi-Fi, yes.
Yeah, but yes, Internet of Things was a big driver, and if you could look into things like connected factories or airports or all sorts of stadiums, for example.
Electric cars, right? Electric cars, they are all connected.
Yes, they are. But yes. So electric cars are interesting, and vehicles in general, because yes, they need connectivities because they need software updates and they need to understand routing and things like that. But think about a connected factory where you need machines to work together well in concert to deliver a manufacturing outcome or whatever it is you're trying to do with your factory. And so those things need to typically have low latency communication to understand where things are, what resources there are, when things need to be ordered, how robots need to move around without crashing into each other. So you can have a very interesting challenge to solve there, which you can then use things like wireless communication to solve it.
That's beautiful. Chris, this is fascinating because I think you're the first person in the CTO office that are into telecommunications. So that's why I'm asking all these amazing questions. It's just feeding my fancy, right? Do you know why people created these conspiracy theories about 5G? Because it came right around COVID, and they were saying that these microwaves were able to activate metals in your body and this and that. Do you know what's the reason behind that?
I think in general, you tend to see people will read into any new technology that that they can create a narrative around what's out there. So, for example, they looked at the concentrations of COVID cases. What's the density of COVID cases, and what's the concentration of cell towers? Well, they're highly correlated because it's population density at the end of the day. So,
where people live.
so of course they're correlated, but doesn't mean there's a causal link between them. So people are suspicious of new technologies for all sorts of reasons, and and it's not always a bad thing to be suspicious of new technologies, because they may have side effects that we don't understand. So, but we saw concerns about cancer risk from back in the 2G days, and 3G, and then 4G, and then 5G, and so people will draw conclusions, and it becomes easier now to share these ideas, and you can find a community of people who share your fears or conspiracies, and reinforce each other in an echo chamber. So it's a double-edged sword. Good communication means you can bring people together, but it can also polarize people.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and if you look at the basic infrastructure from 4G to 5G, they gotta be similar, right? Still microwaves, still air communications, right? Yeah,
well, there's certainly a push to open up higher frequency parts of the spectrum, because there's always a push for more capacity. If you need more capacity, the Shannon limit is there as a physical barrier or a barrier in physics to how much data you can get through a given spectrum. So given you've got that limit, you either make your cells smaller and put more in, or you increase the spectrum. And so if you want to increase the spectrum, then it makes sense to look at a higher frequency bands. So both higher frequency bands come with their own challenges, because there's higher propagation loss, more line of sight transmission, which means that you can't rely on the lower frequency bands. They'll the way that the signals move, or the way signals travel, they can go into buildings, and so we can get a service indoors. You can't get that with the higher frequencies. So it's a different set of challenges, and so the industry's been trying to do that, been trying to address that challenge.
Interesting, Chris. And what do you think the future of wireless communications is going? Is that going to be a 6G someday, or what are they working
Absolutely. On? The industry is already talking about 6G and has already laid down the challenges, or the characteristics they'd like it to be able to deliver. So the International Telecommunications Union defines what will we mean by 5G and what will we mean by 6G, and so 6G is basically those characteristics I mentioned earlier of 5G, but on steroids, turbocharged, and then coupled with some new characteristics. So, for example, building AI in from the ground up to make a more efficient and dynamic and responsive and optimal network, to combine terrestrial, non-terrestrial networks. So satellite communication is a more integral part of the experience and connectivity, and then things like building sensing into the network. So for example, we make radio transmissions to give you connectivity to your phone. Those radio transmissions also respond to the environment, so we can sense what's in the environment, and then if we know what's in the environment, we can respond to it to deliver a better service, a more optimal service, or to understand where our robots are in the factory so they don't crash into each other. And there's all sorts of ways that the industry could work together to deliver a combined entity which does sensing as well as communication. So that will be 6G, I think. But I think there's some really interesting other kind of innovations coming along, because you think about quantum communication. You hear a lot about quantum computing. Quantum communication is also a kind of something in the ascendancy, and it's something which people are looking at now, because it can, in principle, give you very secure communications where you and I can communicate in a way that we are sure that we are communicating securely. using quantum physics, which is something I find fascinating because it tells me something that there's something about the universe which is completely counterintuitive to our everyday experience in quantum physics, and it's coming into communications as we have to build quantum networks and quantum safe networks. So it's and then how we respond to that, it has big implications for the company I work for Viavi, to be able to test those networks, to be able to assure those networks and validate that they're, the integrity is there.
Well, if you think about it, I guess that's the response to AI, because now hackers can use AI to hack pretty much anything. So if you don't have a quantum network that is up to par with that, like how can you protect yourselves? Like, as technology moves forward, we have to think of ways of protecting ourselves, because, like I always say, you can use a knife to cut your food, or you can use a knife to kill a person, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And so quantum computing, as opposed to quantum communication, is a big threat to communications as well, because if you or I may communicate through, say, public key encryption, using very secure public key technology, where it would take you millions of years with a classic computer to crack that communication. But then with a quantum computer, that if you don't have a quantum a post-quantum cryptography algorithm which is resilient to quantum computing, even though the quantum computers don't exist yet, we know that it's moving forward, and sometime in the future we may have a quantum computer that could perform that attack. Someone could eavesdrop our secure communication today, and then in 5 years' time, when the computers exist, they could attack that communication and decrypt it using quantum computers which don't exist today. So we're thinking about how we make our communications quantum safe, and using post-quantum cryptography, which then have their own implications for the existing networks, because those algorithms may be more costly to run, computation needs, so they may have impacts on our firewalls and our infrastructure. So we need to be able to test that our infrastructure is up if we want to be able to introduce those post-quantum cryptography algorithms, but we also want to make sure that our existing infrastructure is able to support those algorithms, so that we don't it's very well very good having a quantum safe network now, but if the network doesn't work because it falls over, then that doesn't help us.
It's interesting, right? I think even Google has shown their quantum computer, and it looks like this gigantic object, but that's how everything starts, right?
Yeah.
I live in a place where we have the Perimeter Institute, and I live in a town where BlackBerry was invented. And the co-founder of BlackBerry created a quantum institute. So we have very bright minds working on quantum here since 20 years ago. And I remember going to some of those conferences, because they will just have, show and tell conferences, and explaining what quantum physics is to a normal computer scientist like me was mind-blowing, because it really defines the physics, the natural physics, isn't it? Once you go small enough, once you see how particles behave in a very tiny level, it's just it's incredible, right?
And the further you go into it, the more weird things get. So with say Bell's inequality, as I understand it, I'm not an expert in this, but if you can show that there's in quantum entanglement, so a particle going that way, which is entangled with a particle going that way, and then we perform a measurement at some distance, there's a correlation between those measurements, which means that they somehow, it appears that they're communicating to each other to agree how they're going to collapse, but how the wave function is going to collapse, which has some correlation. And so then you naturally think, the experts from the last century said, well, maybe there's a hidden variable. So they've already agreed how they're going to collapse, and they've shared that information when they've been created. And yet every experiment that's performed refutes that there is no hidden variable. So is there communication instantaneously at greater than the speed of light, or was there some other mechanism there? Was that decision baked into the universe at the creation, or this, the Big Bang? What could it be, or what else could it be? There's something fundamental about the universe which is just completely counterintuitive. I find it fascinating. It's one of those big mysteries of the universe,
this is when I think that like science is merging with theology, right? Because if you think about it, like how can a particle be a wave? Because at the end of the day, that's when what they observe at the quantum level, right? How can a particle be a wave?
Yeah.
We're talking about something material and something that is not material, something that is, well, that is a wave, like a microwave that comes from a 5G antenna, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What is
So-
that? What is the right interpretation of that? I mean, it's not just how do we unify general relativity and quantum mechanics, which has been puzzling physics for the last century plus. But it's, what is the nature of quantum reality? How should we see reality with the knowledge of how the quantum world works? And that's profoundly puzzling, along with many other challenges about the universe.
It's crazy because for me, like I was born Catholic and then I became a born again Christian through my wife. And then when I started studying quantum physics, I opened up myself to learn about other religions, like Eastern religions, Buddhism, and all that. And then at the end of the day, 3 years ago, I came back to my faith and I realized that, we are eternal beings and there is one Savior. And if you go through that Savior, you can go back to the source, to the Father. So just 2 days ago, I was watching a documentary of, near-death experiences and how people get out of their bodies when they die, and they are able to tell you what's the sticker on top of the lamp above the operating room, and then they come back and they can actually tell you what's above there, and they never been there. So, talking about quantum physics, how that proves that the body is just a vessel and you have a soul and you have a spirit. And that's untangible, because we're talking about tangible stuff and untangible stuff, right? Just this communication, for example, right? I am on a high-end Wi-Fi network connected to a fiber optics cable that God knows what is going through the Atlantic Ocean to reach you through another fiber optics network. And I don't know, maybe you are on a Cat5 infrastructure or something. But it's like, how can you tell that I can speak with you in real time? It's probably 6 p.m. where you are, it's 11 a.m. where I am, and I can see your face and I can hear you. And this
would have been
how
magic
fast
to-
this communication is going. Right?
Yeah. To people 100 years ago, this would have been magic. It's just baffling to those who weren't living with this sort of technology day by day. And it's amazing how far technology's come. And
To me, the best explanation is like, if you wanna believe in the afterlife, just explain why you dream and how you dream and what's going on with your dreaming. Your brain is recycling itself, is cleansing itself, yet you have all these fantastic dreams sometimes and you remember them and you feel like you're in another reality, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, even consciousness itself. I mean, I'm not aware of how we can explain consciousness. Clearly, it's something we experience. We have consciousness, as we're not just kind of robots mechanically living our lives, which we could be. We could have evolved to live mechanically as something which is unconscious and just respond to stimuli through our sense organs without any conscious experience. And yet we do experience conscious experience. And I study I don't study. I watch the field of consciousness studies progressing, and I wonder where that's going to take us in the coming years, because it's another one of those mysteries of the universe, like the quantum mechanics and how that relates to the real world. So it's a wondrous universe which throws many interesting challenges at us to understand.
It's fascinating, right? Like you go into that rabbit hole, you realize that again, science is getting closer to the stuff that we cannot explain, but we know it's there, like consciousness, right? That your consciousness persists after death. I'm 100% convinced of that. Like I said, even through a dream, right? Why? If you're just pure matter, when you go to sleep, you should just turn off and then turn back on, just like you do with a car, right? Just push the button on and it just gains its consciousness through the controls and the engineering, right?
Yeah. And this is, I mean, it reminds me of one of the directions communication is going in is to be able to create a more faithful experience of meeting people using technology. So imagine that you and I could have this meeting. You're in Canada, I'm in the UK, and we're talking through a screen, and it's great. We couldn't do this 30 years ago, or even 20 years ago. But imagine being able to have the impression of sitting in the same room as each other and be able to have a much more rich experience. And this is something, the metaverse is one of those words that's bandied about. But it's the virtual reality world, which would still require. We're not there yet, but it's something which could transform communications in a quite a profound way, I think, and create a richer way to interact with people around the world.
Yeah, and that brings its own challenges, right? I remember watching a movie where everybody was on their VR headset, and you would just live in your couch all day because you can go anywhere in the world with your VR headset.
And I suppose we have to think about how far do we let technology take us, because ultimately machines can be the best friends we could ever have. They know exactly they will know exactly how to react to us, and how to be a perfect companion in many ways, and that can have its own philosophical consequences that we need to think about and consider.
Yeah, like people are fearing that they're going to lose their jobs, right? Like even in the, I run a software consulting firm. We have a bunch of developers and engineers, and I told them, if you don't become an AI prompt engineer, you're probably going to lose your job in 5 years. And I told them that 3 years ago, and it's happening. It's happening already. 40% of source code that we write is made by AI. So even highly trained software engineers, the people that actually write this stuff, is being threatened by AI. Right?
And it makes the job of being a leader that much more challenging, because we're leading through uncharted territory. Not only are we dealing with the technology transformations that we've always been facing, but we're kind of societal changes as well. It's makes the job even more interesting and challenging.
For sure. Or talking about hybrid teams, right? Like when I started my company, one of the things that I wanted to prove myself is that I could actually develop software by having developers working all over the world. This is 2005, right? And I think my internet was 1 megabit connectivity, but we could already do like face-to-face, right? And it worked. But it took me 3-4 years to convince my clients that my developers didn't have to be at their office to write the software, or at my office. But nowadays, right after COVID, people got used to this stuff, and there is negative consequences to do that too, right? Like I think people are going more towards a hybrid model now, where some days they're at the office, and I do feel it, right? Like I did have a head office before COVID, and a lot of people will go there, but people will have the freedom to work from wherever they wanted to work, as long as they deliver the job on time and with an excellent result. But now I don't have a head office. Everything is 100% virtual, because people were not coming. Right after COVID, I had 2 people showing up to the office. I was like, it was a total waste, right?
Yeah. Well, the team I work with, we're completely dispersed around the world, and then none of us really go to the office very much at all, because some of us don't live near an office, and but we've got a colleague in Colorado, the CTO is in Colorado, and they've got a colleague in Texas and Florida. There's 4 of us in the UK, but we live far apart from each other, and there's a couple of us in France, but they live a long way from each other, and a colleague in a few colleagues in Tokyo. In fact, yes, we have in fact just established not Tokyo, in Singapore. We have in fact established an office in Singapore very recently, and starting to build a team there. So that's actually going back, back to a more concentration of people working together, which is, it's proving fruitful, I think. But at the end of the day, we have to be able to cover the regions and be able to, we could all live and work in the same place, but then we'd be flying across the world all the time to go and attend events and take part in presentations and engagements. So it wouldn't make sense.
So that's, and I'm talking about this because this is where I see the threatening of technology and AI and virtual reality. And you talk about, everything that is gaining momentum. If you, for some reason, get ahead enough in technology that you don't have to leave your house at all, I think depression will be the biggest killer of all diseases, because we are social beings. We are created to interact with each other, to go outside and play with my bicycle if I'm a 10-year-old kid. Now kids are just playing with their tablets inside their house during the summertime.
Yes,
right?
and I think the extroverts will thrive, because they'll want to go out and interact with people, and they'll be happy to do that. But the more we kind of need encouragements to unless you're a complete extrovert, sometimes you might need encouragement to go out and to go to the shops or to go and sometimes you're forced to go out. But as the world gets more advanced, then there'll be fewer and fewer reasons to go out and engage with the world, because we can get things to come to us through technology. So there'll be fewer opportunities for most of us to go and engage with other human beings, and that will be perhaps a loss.
That's amazing. Yes, for sure. Chris, it's been almost 40 minutes, and I know you're a busy executive. So let me ask you one last question before we finish the podcast. If you had access to a billboard in front of the busiest highway on earth, what advice would you give to the world?
This is a really good question. I think it's a hard one to answer. There's many things to put on there. I think, you talked about this earlier, about communications either bringing us together or separating us, and perhaps something like communications can unite or divide. You decide would be a.
Oh, I love it, and it even rhymes.
Yes,
you just can divide or unite. You decide. That's amazing. I really like it.
Thank you.
Chris, thank you so much for your time. God bless you. If people would like to follow you, are you on LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there, and I post most of the engagements that I have, going to events and speaking, and I promote that there. So yes, follow me and reach out if you want to know more.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Chris. God bless you all again. And
thank you so much. Thank you so much, David. I've really enjoyed it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leaders in Tech podcast. Check in next week to keep learning how to use technology and leadership to change the game. See you next time.